Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Ksenia. I make videos for people who are going through the family immigration process. In today's video, I will show you how to fill out the I-864 Affidavit of Support form, the new version step by step. The I-864 Affidavit of Support is required for most family-based applicants. It is a standard form that goes in the set of required documents for family-based green cards. But before I show you this guide, I do want you to check out the form I-864-EZ, which is an easier and shorter version of the Affidavit of Support. And if you do meet the criteria for using the form I-864-EZ, I do recommend that you use this version instead of the lengthy regular Affidavit of Support. Like with any USCIS form, you need to be using the Adobe Acrobat Reader on your desktop in order to properly fill out this application. And it is a free version of Adobe, the link to which I will post under this video, where you can simply download it and use it to properly fill out these forms. So click on the form, click the download button, save it to your computer, and open it using Adobe Acrobat. This is the expiration date of this new updated form, and this down here is the edition date that you will be using. The top portion of this form is not for us, so we're just going to skip it and we're going to start here. So just a quick note, you do not have to type everything in capital letters. That is just something that I do. And also you do not have to write N/A in all unapplicable boxes. USCIS allows both NA and blank. So part 1 of this form will ask you to identify yourself as the kind of sponsor that you are. The two most common types of sponsorship that this form is used for is either by the petitioners, so option 1A, or by joint sponsors, option 1D. The petitioner must fill out the Affidavit of Support even if he or she does not make enough income, has zero income, and will be using a co-sponsor like a joint sponsor or a household member. As a petitioner, you must fill out the form I-864. And if you have a joint sponsor, like in the option 1D, your joint sponsor will fill out an additional I-864 form. So you cannot select two options in one form. You can only select one box. You also need to fill out separate I-864 forms for each relative that you are sponsoring who has a separate petition I-130. Select an option whether you are a petitioner or the joint sponsor. And by the way, if you're confused about the difference between petitioning sponsors, joint sponsors, and household members, I will link a video that makes a distinction that you should watch prior to filling out this application so that you have a better idea and understanding of different types of co-sponsors, petitioning sponsors, etc. All of these additional options are not very common, so I'm going to skip through them, but I do want to point out the option 1E, which is where people often make a huge mistake. Sometimes when the petitioning sponsor doesn't make enough income, they will get a joint sponsor, a co-sponsor. And the mistake that they make is that the petitioner will select this box, I'm the first joint sponsor, and then the joint sponsor will select this box, I'm the second of two joint sponsors. That is incorrect. This option is not for people who have a co-sponsor. This option is for people who have two joint sponsors. You can only have two joint sponsors if you have multiple family members sponsored under one petition. You cannot have two joint sponsors for one intending immigrant. Moving on to part 2, provide information about you, the sponsor, whoever is filling out this specific Affidavit of Support. The sponsor's full legal name, provide the sponsor's current mailing address. In care of name is only if somebody else is receiving mail on your behalf at this address. If you are able to receive mail at this address, you can skip this top line and start typing your address here. Next, answer the question if your current mailing address is the same as your physical address. So physical address means where you actually live. If you live and receive mail at this same address, click yes and skip this portion. But if your mailing address is, for example, a PO box, but then you reside somewhere else, you will click no and provide your physical address only if different from above. In our case, we live and receive mail at the same address. Moving on, provide your country of domicile. So country of domicile for sponsors must be United States, because if you're not domiciled in the United States, you're not eligible to be a sponsor, and you will need to provide proof of your domicile. And as a petitioning sponsor, if you currently reside overseas, the NVC, for example, for the consular process, may request you to provide documents that reestablish your domicile or your intent to reestablish domicile back in the United States. Provide your date of birth and your country of birth and your social security number. Then provide your immigration status, U.S. citizen, U.S. national, or you could be a lawful permanent resident. Same applies to joint sponsors. Only U.S. citizens, nationals, or permanent residents can be joint sponsors. Provide your A number if you have one. If you were born in the United States, you're not going to have an A number, but if you are a U.S. citizen through naturalization, you should still provide your alien number, which is listed on your naturalization certificate. And if you have an online account number from USCIS, you can also indicate it here, but you only get a USCIS online account number if you have ever filed an application online. So for example, if you have ever filed the I-130 application, the petition for your relative online, you probably do have an online account number, so you can write it here. And answer the military service question, but it is only to be completed by petitioning sponsors, because the petitioning sponsors that are on active duty in the United States Armed Forces are eligible for the reduced income requirements. We will talk about it in just a second, but only petitioning sponsors need to answer this question. Part 3 is all about the principal immigrant. So the principal immigrant is the person who is the primary person listed on the I-130 petition that you submitted for. Provide the principal immigrant's full legal name. So let's say in our case, it's our spouse we're sponsoring, and their mailing address. If it is someone who is adjusting their status from inside the United States, then obviously this mailing address would be the address in the United States. But if your beneficiary is located overseas, for example, then it would be their overseas address. Provide other information, so the country of citizenship or nationality of your beneficiary. And by the way, if your beneficiary has multiple citizenships or nationalities, type in the nationality or citizenship in here, the passport of which your beneficiary used to enter the United States or is using in their DS-260 application. Any additional nationalities can be listed on the additional information page. So this is in reference to page 3, part 3, item 3. So if you scroll all the way down to the additional information page, you can type in here page 3, part 3, item 3, and write, for example, additional citizenship information here. Okay, moving on, provide your beneficiary's date of birth, their alien registration number if they have one. If your beneficiary has never been in the United States or has never applied for any kind of immigration benefits in the past, they probably don't have an A number, so you can leave it blank. But say, for example, your beneficiary is already in the United States, maybe they had a DACA case, an asylum case, something like that, maybe an employment case, and they had been given an A number in the past, you can type in that A number here. If they don't have one, leave it blank. Same applies to USCIS online account number. Again, your beneficiary would only have it if they have ever filed a form online through the USCIS account. If they've never filed online applications, they probably don't have an online account number, so just leave affidavit blank and provide your beneficiary's daytime phone number. If it is a foreign phone number, it will not let you type in any special characters like the plus sign. It may not let you type in the foreign phone number if it's too long. So you can do that after printing out the form with a black pen. And if your beneficiary is in the United States right now and they don't really have a US phone number, you can use your phone number as a petitioner. Moving on to part 4. This is where you will need to pay close attention because this part is what causes a lot of confusion. So first, you need to answer if you are sponsoring the principal applicant, the principal immigrant listed in this part, in part 3. If you are a petitioning sponsor, you will answer yes to this question. If you are a joint sponsor, you will also answer yes to this question. The only time you would select no to this question is if you are the second of 2 joint sponsors, like we discussed on the very first page in option 1E. So if you are selecting 1E, this second box right here, that is the only time you will select 1 no. In all other cases, you will select 1 yes. Next, answer the question if you are sponsoring family members immigrating at the same time or within 6 months of the principal immigrant. This refers to derivatives included on the same petition as the principal immigrant. Do not count anybody here who has a separate visa petition. This only applies to derivative children and spouses of principal applicants who were included on the same petition. If you are a U.S. citizen sponsoring your spouse, but also maybe sponsoring your stepchild, you will not select this box. Your stepchild has a separate petition. If you are a U.S. citizen sponsoring your mom and dad, you will not click this box because your mom and dad have separate petitions. If you are a U.S. citizen sponsoring your spouse who came here on a fiancé visa, who also has a K2 fiancé child, you will select this box because that K2 child was a derivative on your fiancé's I-129F petition. If you are a permanent resident and you filed for your spouse under the F2A category and your F2A spouse also has a child, that child is included on the same I-130 petition. So you will select this box. And the same applies to number 3. The only difference between these 2 items is when do these derivatives immigrate to the US, at the same time or more than 6 months after. If you select 2 or 3, if it applies in your case, you will then list the family members that are coming to the United States with the principal applicant. So anyway, because in our case, our US citizen is only sponsoring his spouse in this affidavit, we are only going to click the box 1 yes and move forward to the next section. So part 5 is where we will need to calculate the sponsor's household size. It is important to properly calculate the household size because this will determine the income requirements necessary for the sponsor. If you would like to know what the income requirements are, you can review the I-864P table on the USCIS site. However, USCIS looks for amounts way higher than they list in these income requirements. And if you have questions about income requirements, I do encourage you to review my I-864 playlist, which talks about this trick that USCIS uses. When counting the household size, make sure that you're not counting anybody more than once because multiple people can fall under the same category below. First, you need to indicate the number of people sponsored in this affidavit, which means in this specific form I-864, that number will consist of the principal applicant from part 3 and any additional derivative members in part 4. Because we left part 4 blank, the only person we're sponsoring in this affidavit is Jane, our beneficiary, so we will type 1 here. The joint sponsors will basically calculate it the same way. They will need to count anybody they're sponsoring in this specific affidavit. Then count yourself, so the petitioner or the joint sponsor. Next, if you are married, enter 1 for your spouse, but because you already counted them here, you will then type 0 here. Like in our case, John is sponsoring Jane, who is his spouse. We already counted Jane in here as the intending immigrant, so we're not going to count her again. If you have any dependent children, enter the number here. So if John has children or stepchildren, you would count them here. Now, I often get a question about which children must be counted in the affidavit of support. A lot of sponsors are wondering if they have children who they do not have custody of, or if the children do not reside with them, do you still have to count them? And according to the form instructions, you must count all children who are underage, regardless of your custody status of these children and regardless of their dependent status in your taxes. So even if you do not claim these children, if they reside with the other parent, that doesn't matter. You still have to count them. And that is one mistake that causes a lot of issues for them later on. They get RFEs for an incorrectly calculated household size. You will not be penalized for adding more children to the affidavit of support, but you can be penalized for not counting children that you're supposed to count. Any child who is under the age 18 must be counted here. If you have no children or stepchildren, type in 0. And if you are filling out the I-864 form for a child and you already counted them in this item right here, then obviously do not count them again in item 4 and type in 0. Next, if you have any other dependents, enter the number here. So this refers to dependents that you have on tax returns. So if you have adult sons or daughters who are over 18, but you do count them still on your tax returns, for example, you have to input them here. So basically, any dependents that you have listed on your most recent tax return, you have to count in here. If you have ever sponsored anybody else on the form 864 or 864EZ who is now a lawful permanent resident, you must count them here as well. But if you filled out an affidavit of support, but the people have not yet come to the United States and have not become lawful permanent residents yet, you do not have to count them, because your affidavit of support obligations kick in after the person becomes a green card holder. So if they're not yet green card holders, you do not have to count them. And finally, if you have additional people residing with you who maybe were not counted in these first items, who are combining their income with yours to help you out financially, type them in here. But this item is optional. So keep in mind that you do not have to count your brothers or sisters that live with you, your parents that live with you, or adult children that live with you whom you didn't have to count here yet. You only need to add them here if they are planning to contribute their income to help you out with the financial obligation. And finally, item 8 is just the total household size. And this is why I was telling you guys to use Adobe Acrobat Reader to fill out this specific application in particular, is because using Adobe, it will calculate the household size for you correctly. If you don't use Adobe, the household size will be bugged and it will not let you fill out the application correctly. As a joint sponsor, don't forget that your household size, that includes people directly in your household, your dependents, your children, your spouse, you also must consider the intending immigrant. So the I-864P requirements must include the additional person or people who are included in the affidavit of support. So moving forward, Let's talk about employment and income. Select if you are employed, self-employed, retired, or unemployed. If you select employed, you have an opportunity to provide two of your employers here if you have more than one job. If you have three jobs and it doesn't fit in here, then you can scroll all the way to the last page and provide additional information. So first, write in your occupation, the place where you work. So if you are working for a company where you are an independent 1099 contractor, it is really best to say that you are employed and then just say the company name and then provide your kind of occupation. I would not select the self-employed option unless you truly did not have a 1099 and you are solely like a business owner working for yourself, not as a contractor for a company. So in that case, you would select self-employed. But the self-employment situation on the affidavit of support really causes a lot of issues for the sponsors and for USCIS. And I do have a video talking about it because there's a lot more evidence that you need to provide in this situation. So if you are just a contracted type person, I would select that you are employed and just provide the company that you contract for. If you are retired, you can select retired and indicate the date since when you retired, or if you're unemployed, select your unemployed and the date. Next, moving on to the estimate of your individual annual income. So this question 7 is just an estimate for the current year, in the year when you are filling out this affidavit of support. Here's where you would write in the estimate salary that you have for 2025. And if you selected unemployed, then your current individual income is 0. And remember, the petitioning sponsor must fill out an affidavit of support even if their income is 0. This is not how much you made this year so far. This is an estimate for the whole year. Next, the form will give you a chance to type in anyone else who will be contributing their income to yours. And this is from people included in your household size above. So if you have a spouse, a parent, or maybe even a child or other dependents who were counted in here, who will be contributing their income, you will type in their name and income here, as well as their relationship to you. This is for household members only who will be contributing their income. One big mistake that I often see is that people will write this. They will include their spouse's name and then they will write that their spouse's income is 0 because they file their taxes jointly. This is a huge mistake and it will result in an RFE or delays in your case if you're doing it through consular process. Only write people here who will be contributing their income. If they don't make any money, do not write them here. Your beneficiary can be included as the person who will help contribute to your income, but only in the case where the beneficiary is authorized to work in the United States. Your beneficiary then will have to provide proof of making this income with proper authorization, which means they were on a kind of visa that allowed them to work. If your spouse beneficiary is here on a visa that doesn't allow them to work, or they overstayed their visa and they're out of status, you cannot use their income to help yours, even if they have been filing taxes with you together. So, input anybody else here or nobody else here who will be contributing their income. And if you are filling out this form in Adobe, it will calculate for you the total sum of all incomes listed in this part in this question. My current annual household income in this form means the total of all lines from part 6. If you do not write anybody in person 1, 2, 3, etc., then this number will simply be the repetition of your annual income here. If you are, I sometimes see a mistake here from sponsors who file their taxes jointly with their spouse, but then they only choose to use their own income. In here, they type in their household income total as with their spouse. But that is not what this question is asking for. This question is asking you to simply sum up box 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So read the prompts very carefully. The next question, 13, only refers to people who will fill out the form I-864A. And that is to be completed by these people, if you include anyone here who is the sponsor's household member. So whoever you list in here will have to fill out the form I-864A and attached along with this affidavit of support. But there is an exception if this person right here is your beneficiary and they don't have any derivative applicants included on the same petition. They can check this box 14. And what this means, if your beneficiary is contributing their income to yours to help sponsor themselves, basically, they do not need to complete the form 864A because they don't have accompanying dependents. If Jane contributes her income, we will click this box and type Jane's name because she is the beneficiary and she doesn't have any derivatives on the same case as hers. So she does not need to fill out this contract form. If you are a joint sponsor and you have a spouse who will be helping you sponsor intending immigrants, if your spouse wants to contribute their income, then the joint sponsor spouse will have to check box 13 and fill out this contract form. Moving on to the federal income tax return information, it asks you if you have filed federal tax returns for each of the most recent 3 years. If you filed taxes for all 3 of those years, select yes. If you filed for only 1 or only 2 of those years, select no. Until April 15th of this year, the tax filing deadline, you are allowed to keep using the 2023 taxes. Of course, if you end up filing your 2024 taxes, then you will count 2024 as your most recent tax year. Now, that doesn't mean that USCIS will not send you an RFE and request additional information because they may not be comfortable basing their decision of your sponsorship ability based on taxes from basically 2 years ago. So you want to make sure that as soon as you are able to file 2024 taxes, then you do so. The other thing to keep in mind is the petitioner must file tax returns and attach their tax returns even if they have a co-sponsor, even if they are not making enough income, unless the petitioning sponsor has absolutely no income and is not required to file taxes. You must attach only the taxes for the most recent tax year. So you only need to meet the income requirement basically on the most recent tax year. But you can use your second and third most recent years to help you establish your ability to sponsor. When we move on to questions 16A through 16C, you are asked to type or print the most recent tax year and your total income for that most recent tax year. If your total income was 0, type 0. If you were not required to file a federal income tax return, type not applicable. And also type not applicable if you're not submitting additional tax returns. So let's say, for instance, we have already filed our 2024 taxes. So that becomes our most recent year. We will type in the value from those federal tax returns exactly as it appears on the total income line. Not adjusted gross income, total income. In the form instructions, you will see that USCIS clarifies that they look at the total income line. If you write your AGI in here, or you write number from your W-2 that doesn't match the total income from your taxes, you will get an automatic RFE for that. If you are planning to add additional tax returns from second and third or second only year, then type in that year in here and include the income amount, again, exactly as it appears on those tax returns in total income line. And if you are not planning to type in your 2022 returns, for example, then you can write N/A after printing this form. It will not let you do it in here. A couple of more very important notes about tax returns. If for the most recent year you were not required to file taxes, maybe for example you were unemployed, then you will write not applicable in this line and check box 17. Another note, even if you file taxes jointly with your spouse, even if the amounts listed in taxes are the combination of your and your spouse's incomes, you must type it in exactly as it is. Next, if for the second and third most recent tax years, you did not meet the income requirements, do not write those taxes here. Simply write N/A in these lines. Only include these additional years if they meet the income requirements. If they don't, do not write them, do not attach them. The next important note, if you have a tax filing extension before April 15th, fine. You can go ahead and attach 2023 tax returns. But if you are filling out this affidavit of support after the tax filing deadline has passed, USCIS does not accept extensions, and they will send you an RFE asking to provide them with the most recent tax returns. And that also applies in situations even when you have a joint sponsor who will fill out an additional affidavit of support. You still, as a petitioner, must file taxes, so your extension will not count. Once you type in the tax return information, move on to Part 7. So Part 7 is all about assets, and you only need to fill out this portion of the form if your tax return income right here is below the required amounts on the I-864P table. So if your income is enough, you do not have to fill out the assets information. The assets are used to supplement income in the instructions of this form. The value of those assets must be equal 3 or 5 times the difference between the requirement and the amount of income that you actually showing here. USCIS prefers consistent income rather than assets. You're not required to do so if your income meets the requirement, but if you really want to, you can include your assets here. But do keep in mind that any asset that you include here must be backed with appropriate evidence. If you are including assets like checking and savings accounts or cash values, you have to provide 12 months of bank statements showing that you have maintained at least this amount that you're listing in this line. If you are listing real estate, you must include its value minus the mortgage debt that you have. And also, you must obtain a new appraisal of your real estate. If you have stocks, bonds, etc., then you must also demonstrate the receipts or the statements from these assets as well to demonstrate their value, as well as how you have obtained these stocks, bonds, etc. If you are including assets such as a value of your vehicle, you cannot include the value of your vehicle if that's the only vehicle you have. you can only include the value of your second, third, etc. vehicle. And for that vehicle, if you completely own it, you will need to send them a copy of the title to that car and its actual value. If you have household members who will be contributing their assets, so people who were listed in here, you can add their assets as well as from their Form 864A. And if the principal applicant is also adding assets, you can include their assets here and write the total here. And then if you're including all of these different types of assets, if you're using Adobe, it will calculate the grand total of all asset values from everyone in here. If you are an intending immigrant including assets in another country, aside from the evidence we talked about in here, you will need to provide the translation of all that evidence as well as the exchange value. So including assets is really a big headache, and even in the cases where you try to include assets, USCIS can still turn around and send you an RFE asking for you to get a joint sponsor. Make sure that you properly read the form instructions. So Part 8 is the sponsor's contract, contact information, and signature. It describes the sponsor's obligations, so it applies to both petitioning and joint sponsors. Your obligations end in one of these circumstances. Do know that divorce does not end your I-864 obligations. Then select if you can read and understand English or if an interpreter translated the questions for you. And then also select if somebody else prepared this form for you. Type in your phone number and you can repeat your mobile number here if it's the same as daytime, or can leave it blank and type in your email. Sign this form. This form must be signed in pen. I just released a video talking about immigration signatures and some tips you need to know about signing your immigration paperwork, so check out that video. But you can type the date of your signature. If you are uploading this form on the SEAC account, for example, or if you're responding to an RFE with this form, you must print the whole thing out, sign it in pen, scan it, and upload it. Part 9 and 10 are about the interpreter and preparer if you used one. If you didn't, leave these sections blank. And we are at the last part, Part 11, to clarify any information if necessary. And finally, let's talk about the evidence. I do have the evidence for this form listed in my cover letter samples that you can obtain in my shop for free. But in general, every sponsor must provide proof of their status, which means a copy of the sponsor's U.S. passport, U.S. birth certificate, a copy of their green card. Next, you are required to provide income tax returns or federal income tax transcript for the years that you are listing in this application. You must provide it for the most recent year, and if you're including additional years, you must provide those too. So when it comes to the tax returns or tax return transcripts, make sure that you are sending either a copy of the Form 1040. You can also go to the IRS website, create an account, and download the tax return transcripts from that IRS site. Make sure that you are downloading the tax return transcript, not wage and income transcript, not accounts transcript. If you send an incorrect type of transcript, you will get an RFE. Next, if you are the kind of sponsor who files taxes jointly with their spouse, but is only planning to use your own income, you must then also attach a copy of your W-2 or 1099s showing which part of that total income in your returns actually belongs to you. So those are the required pieces of evidence for petitioning and joint sponsors. But there is also additional evidence, optional evidence, that you should include to your best ability. Pay stubs from the past 6 months and an employment verification letter that shows how much money you make per hour and per year and what position you hold when you started the job, etc. So those 2 pieces are optional, but they are highly recommended. A big mistake that I see people make is just sending a copy of W-2s. That is not enough. You must send the actual tax return or tax return transcript. If you are a self-employed business owner or a retired sponsor, then you must attach a lot of additional evidence. I will link some very useful resources, videos, and websites that talk about this evidence in the description box of this video below, because there is a lot to discuss there. If you included any assets, as we discussed, provide the proof of those assets here. And if anybody completed the form I-864A, then review the form instructions for this form to make sure that you're also including appropriate evidence for that. Whoever fills out the form 864A for you must then also attach proof of their relationship to you as the sponsor, proof of you residing together, as well as their own proof of taxes and income. If you're including the income of the sponsored immigrant, the principal applicant, like we mentioned before, aside from the proof of income, must then also provide a copy of the status, a copy of their visa, a copy of their EAD, showing that they were legally allowed to work in the United States, as well as their own tax returns. Like I said, if you have any additional questions, check out the form instructions for this form. Check out the many videos that I made about this form. I hope that you found this video useful. Please give it a thumbs up so more people can see it. And I hope to see you guys in my next videos. Bye!